This is CGTN, China Global Television Network. Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
I'm Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Face to face, Russian and Ukrainian delegations meet for a second round of talks on Belarusian territory.
Our other headlines: Russia's attacks on Ukraine's cities have intensified as the invasion enters its second week with no pause in hostilities.
If someone enters my home, I don't know what to do. I just say, okay, come in, but don't kill me, because I don't have a gun.
We'll be hearing from the city of Kherson, now under Russian control, where Moscow's tanks and troops are patrolling the streets.
And a warm welcome at the end of a harrowing journey. Hungarian volunteers greet refugees as more than 1 million people flee Ukraine. The second round of talks between Russia and Ukraine is now underway in Belarus, a country which has been heavily criticised and sanctioned for its role in the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Ahead of the meeting, one member from the Ukrainian delegation posted on Facebook that the two sides have reached consensus over establishing a humanitarian corridor.
Well, our correspondent Ryan Thompson is in Poland near the Belarusian border. Ryan, what do we know about this latest round of talks?
Hi there, Jamie. It's been a long point to actually get there. We've been talking for hours and hours, but finally the two sides have sat down, the Russian delegation as well as the Ukrainian delegation, sitting at a common table in a common room to see if they can find some kind of an accord here. We've gotten the agenda for the meeting from the Ukrainian delegation ahead of time. It appears number one item on their priority list is a ceasefire to stop the shelling, to save lives here. Then, if they're able to make some progress on that, then they want to see if a truce could at least potentially be reached here. Potential is the key word. And then one thing that seems to be in at least common agreement that we were reporting earlier is this idea of an aid corridor. It was something that was specifically requested by the Red Crescent to bring in much-needed supplies into Ukraine. This will be a laundry list of items, very complicated, and with Monday's talk showing no real agreement besides the fact that they would come together again, it's going to be really, really difficult to have these two sides meet in the middle. We are watching very closely as the talks have just begun a little bit over an hour ago and could carry on into the night. It's really up to these leaders to decide when they will dismiss themselves, but if they are able to reach at least an inch of progress here, then they will likely continue.
Meeting is one thing, talking another, and agreeing another thing still, I guess. Is there likely to be any sign of any movement on either side?
That's the hard part, Jamie. No, not really. I laid out the situation of what Ukrainians are looking for, their agenda for the meeting, but the Russian list of demands released just about a day ago is quite strict. Number one, they are looking to have Donbas region enter into a special administrative capacity. Ultimately, observers believe that would mean it would eventually return to Russia. Crimea also on the list, being something that becomes strictly part of Russia. And one thing that is definitely a no-go for the Ukrainian side here is that Russia would demand a demilitarization of Ukraine. So that means handing over all the weapons, all the tanks, all of these supplies that have been sent over by a number of Western militaries and countries to help aid them in their fight here. It is very, very unlikely that you're going to see Volodymyr Zelensky, the Ukrainian president, actually agree to that. I think it's safe to say it's a non-starter for the Ukrainians.
Ryan, thanks for that. Ryan Thompson, our correspondent in Poland on the Belarusian border.
Russia's military assault on Ukraine's cities has intensified as the Russian invasion enters its second week.
Hundreds of casualties are now reported in the city of Mariupol, which has become the focus of the fighting after the neighbouring port city of Kherson fell under Russian control on Wednesday. Ukraine says over 2,000 civilians have now been killed, with aerial bombardment continuing in major cities.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent, Nuid Jabarkul, who is in the city of Lviv. So, Nuid, growing concern over the city of Mariupol.
Yeah, that's right. The pictures and videos coming out of there on social media, largely this is a war that's really being documented minute by minute on social media. Very, very grim. Some pictures of horror as a result of what the Ukrainian government says is Russian air bombardments, Russian shellings over several days now, which has led to Mariupol being cut off. It is a strategically important city, a port city, the biggest port city in Ukraine, home to more than 400,000 people. If you listen to what the city council and local authorities say there, they say that there's no food, there's no water, there's no power, there's no electricity. And you can probably see from when I'm talking just how cold it is in Ukraine at the moment. Now, these hundreds of thousands of people currently sieged inside the city, according to Ukrainian officials, and that's something that we're seeing in other parts of the country as well, as Russia's escalation continues, perhaps in a bid to try and have some leverage in these talks and negotiations, which look like they may ramble on for several more rounds. The city council in Mariupol saying that what's happening there at the moment, the situation there is so devastating that they're comparing it to Nazi Germany's siege of Leningrad, St. Petersburg, as it's now known in Russia. So this is something that we're seeing happen in other parts of the country where there is some resistance. There was Ukrainian resistance in Mariupol. That's still going on, particularly around the center of the city. But in other parts nearby, Kherson, a city not too far away, that's now fallen into Russian hands, where the resistance has been pushed right into the center of the city.
Well, Nuid, I want to ask you about Kherson in a moment, but first of all, let's talk about the capital, Kyiv, where the United States says that Russian troops are still being held back on the outskirts. What more do we know?
Yeah, well, Kyiv really is the golden prize for Vladimir Putin and Russia's offensive here in Ukraine. They've made no attempt to try and hide that. Volodymyr Zelensky and his government currently in hiding in an unknown location in Kiev. But there again, there's reports of shelling and heavy artillery strikes and aerial bombardment. Lots of people currently down in bunkers trying to find any shelter they can. It's not just inside the main city where up to 3 million people live, but on the outskirts as well. That's where the fierce fighting is happening. A few moments ago, we saw a major blast purportedly showing on social media of Bucha in the north, which fell into Ukrainian hands, taken back from Russian hands, which it fell into a few days before. But that miles of long convoys currently trying to get through to Kiev. Obviously, they're trying to get in through the ground, the Russian troops. There are tanks in there. There are other armored vehicles, but that has been held off, partly because of Ukrainian resistance, but partly Western intelligence officials say because of the incapabilities of Russia's current armed forces. The weather as well, some of the ice beginning to thaw, which makes moving these sorts of heavy tons of equipment much harder. It's been sat outside Kiev about 30 kilometers away in recent days, and at the moment it shows no sign of getting closer. But what that means is that if they can't get closer on the ground militarily, Russia may see that its best chances of making an impact are up in the sky, which is bad news for civilians, particularly given the high-rise blocks that you see all around Kiev and in Kharkiv as well, further east, another city of 1.5 million people.
And you mentioned Kherson, which is now under Russian control. What do we know about what's happening there?
Yeah, well, an important part of this war now into its second week. Kherson is another strategic location down in the south, just above Crimea and just west of Mariupol. It's home to about 130,000 people, so once again, a human impact to what's happening here. The Russians said that they moved in on Wednesday and took full control of the city, the first major one to fall, population area to fall into Moscow's hands, and that's something that's now been verified by the Ukrainian authorities, admitting that they've been outgunned there and just urging, according to local local officials, the Russians, not to take anything out on civilians. Now, one thing must be stressed, the picture coming from Moscow and its response very, very different in this. If you look at the figures that they're talking about, Moscow says they've lost 500 troops. Ukraine says 9,000 Russian troops have been killed. So the real picture may be somewhere in between those. But one thing which is undeniable at the moment, is the fact that these images on social media in the first few days they were scant, but now they're coming almost minute by minute and showing the real devastation and impact and the human loss of life that this conflict is having.
Louis Jabarkil in Lviv, thanks very much for that update.
Well, Zainish Hussein lives in the Ukrainian city of Kherson, the first major city to fall into Russian hands. He told me what it was like to see Russian tanks and Russian soldiers outside his apartment.
Well, things have changed dramatically in the last 48 hours. What we have seen before was bombing that was happening out of the city. You will hear loud bangs, but you are not eyewitnessing anything. So things changed tomorrow morning. I woke up under loud mechanical sounds, and then I went to the window and I saw these tanks and Russian soldiers. They're firing these warning shots with their machine guns or whatever they have, warning people to get inside their homes. And it was complete chaos, people running inside. A couple of hours they stayed there, and then they were gone. They were regular patrolling, streets were silent. I believe that they reached some agreement with the city administration last evening, and things were a bit calm today. There were people outside trying to get food, supplies, and groceries for themselves. But we have clear rules. There are curfew hours after 6 o'clock. You cannot be outside. A bunch of other rules that have been introduced. The city is completely under Russian control for sure.
We're watching the pictures that you posted online on your Twitter feed showing those tanks rolling through the streets and the soldiers on the road. I can't imagine to think what that was like when you looked out of your apartment window and you saw that. I mean, what did you think? How did it feel?
I mean, looking out the window and looking at the tanks just like literally 10, 20 meters away from your place, and knowing that probably these are the tanks who have shelled the civilian buildings a couple of days before. And this is when you think, like, maybe it's over, maybe they're going to do the same to us. And specifically looking at the soldiers, I mean, the way they were treating civilians, I mean, being that close to a soldier that you feel that he probably killed innocent civilians like me just a couple of days ago, it is a very scary thing, especially being with a family. I have a 3-year-old daughter. It is terrifying. Like, I don't have right words to explain this, actually, the right feelings.
I just wonder how you are coping, because I know that your wife is obviously with you and your young daughter. I mean, what do you say to them? Do you have enough clean water? Do you have enough food to keep going?
The supply situation is bad. So it's like hunting for food every day. You wake up every morning and you run to the nearby markets to see if you have anything, because the supplies have been cut off. Like, they're not getting any more supplies. So there are empty shelves. There are hundreds of people standing in the queue. You don't have a choice to just grab your hand on anything that you see, whether it's a chocolate or a packet of rice or some potatoes, like anything that will keep you alive. That is the thing. Talking about daughter, I mean, she's 3 years old and she won't understand all of this. So we try to keep her occupied with cartoons and with earphones around her ears so that she does not hear all these things, terrible things that are happening outside. So indeed, I mean, this is the only child I have, and we're learning things every day. And then suddenly, with war standing in front of you, I kind of felt lost, actually, and terrified, for sure.
The world is watching. What is your message to the West?
The wars and the political stuff, it keeps happening. But what I heard from the military side is that someone needs to cover our skies and they can win this. This is the first thing. For civilians, you need to do something for the basics, like for medicine, for food and something like that. And third thing is a green corridor. No one speaks about it. There should be an exit, a safe exit for people who want to leave with their children, just like me. I can't imagine being on a road in the middle of war with my 3-year-old daughter, but someone can do something. Those people who want to peacefully leave, give them a green corridor. This is the message that I have for people.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Sanctions are ramping up and people are protesting. We're in Russia next for the backlash over Ukraine.
Ранним утром 24 февраля Владимир Путин заявил, что в ответ на обращение руководителей республик Донбасса принял решение провести специальную военную операцию.
Now, from what we're hearing, definitely hear those air raid sirens in the background again, which means we might have to head inside at some point.
Действительно тревожной была прошлая ночь в украинской столице.
We're hearing that a number of points of military infrastructure in Ukraine.
Сейчас съемочная группа находится в больнице Петровского района Донецка.
We're seeing people with suitcases scurrying about, but getting out to where? They're not quite sure.
15 часов проехали, пробыли в пути. Пока ехали...
Welcome back to Global Business Europe. Just a reminder that CGTN is available to watch for free on all the major digital platforms, on Smart TV or online on Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview. In Russia, anti-war protests are growing and the economy is starting to feel the effect of wide-ranging sanctions. Let's talk now to our correspondent Giles Gibson, who is in Moscow for us. So, Giles, the EU reporting that the Kremlin may even be considering martial law in Russia to stop the unrest. So what's happening?
Yeah, Robin, we have the Federation Council here in Russia, which is the upper chamber of the Russian parliament. They are going to be meeting on Friday. And this meeting is unscheduled, so that is what is leading to these reports that the Russian parliament could be considering bringing in some sort of legislation which would declare martial law across the country. It has to be said that we have not had any confirmation about this either from the Kremlin or from Russian politicians, so this is still very much up in the air at this point. In the meantime, we've been hearing from the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov really saying that Russia is not going to step back from any of its demands roughly a week into this military conflict. Take a listen to what he had to say.
We are ready to talk, but we will continue our operation. We can't allow ourselves to preserve infrastructure threatening the safety of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. Demilitarization, in this sense, I mean the destruction of the infrastructure that threatens us, will be completed. Even if we sign the peace treaty, it must include such an article.
Giles, let's talk about Russia's economy. What's the latest on possible capital controls to support it?
Well, earlier in the week, the Russian President Vladimir Putin put out this decree basically banning cash exports of foreign currency over the value of $10,000 US. We then saw the central bank here in Moscow really stepping in and trying to calm some nerves about this, because that triggered lots of speculation about whether, large Russian corporations, companies in that crucial oil and gas sector were about to start defaulting on their foreign debt. The Russian central bank trying to calm nerves about that, insisting that that is not going to be the case. Of course, all of these capital controls, all of these moves from the Russian financial authorities have come off the back of the Russian ruble just plunging dramatically on Monday when markets opened off the back of sanctions being imposed over the course of the weekend. The ruble dropping by as much as 30% against the US dollar, and it really hasn't recovered very much ever since that.
And Giles, you were telling us about Russia's thoughts about measures it might be considering to stop the unrest. What's the situation now with anti-war protests?
Well, Alexei Navalny, who, of course, is a very well-known opposition figure, he's currently in prison. He's sent out some messages via his lawyers who've been posting them on social media for him, calling for there to be daily protests here in Russia and Belarus and in countries around the world. Of course, we know from independent monitoring groups here in Russia that over the course of the last week or so, several thousand people have been detained by Russian authorities for trying to or going out onto the streets and actually protesting against this invasion. We also crucially have the Russian Ministry of Defense now acknowledging that by their count, almost 500 Russian soldiers have been killed in this conflict so far. So I think the central question really as we head into the weekend is whether that mounting death count is going to push Russians who wouldn't normally go out onto the streets to protest to join these demonstrations that have been breaking out in cities all over the place.
Giles Gibson in Moscow, thanks very much.
Well, the Russia-Ukraine crisis is rocking the financial markets, which are fluctuating at the prospect of higher inflation as commodity prices soar. Let's talk to our correspondent, Juliet Mann, who's watching the story for us. So what is happening on the markets?
Well, volatility is the word. I'd say that your leading shares are off their worst levels, but they're still hovering in negative territory. I mean, in London, a lot of companies posted solid results, but then their shares all got pulled a bit lower. All got being dragged down, losing ground. I mean, the FTSE has mostly been in negative territory. And when we look in the United States, they're also on edge, but were pulled up a little bit by financial stocks, and that was after the Fed's Jerome Powell backed a rate rise this month. So what's it all about? Well, we keep talking about this. It is so much about energy prices and so much about oil. It hit $119 a barrel. That's for the first time since 2013 at one point, before slipping back. But we're still talking $111 a barrel because no one's buying Russian oil. And that's putting pressure on other kinds of supplies that are out there. European natural gas prices, now, they are all over the place, all over the place. It's crazy. The volatility, analysts are telling me, is unprecedented. They're hitting all-time highs in Asia and in Europe before losing all of those gains again. So benchmark Dutch futures were up 2.7% higher before slumping. The UK equivalent up 3.5% before a subsequent slump. Now, the issue here is this huge dependency on Russian gas supplies from the EU in particular. The EU relies on around 40% of their gas supplies. They come from Russia. And it's not nearly so much in the UK, but of course there's a knock-on effect here for what's left, what the other supplies are, for example, from Norway. And so that's why the UK, too, is looking at its exposure. So the International Energy Agency, they've come up with a 10-point plan. So it includes advice to governments not to sign up to new contracts with Russian suppliers or not to renew expiring deals, a whole load of things like that. They're even saying to consumers, if we turn our dials down 1 degree, that's going to save on gas and maybe have an impact on all of this. But even if all of the IEA's advice was taken on board, it's only really going to affect a third or reduce the EU's reliance on Russian gas by about a third. And so the issue still remains that the EU is still heavily reliant on Russian fossil fuel supplies, which, of course, are controlled or under Putin's control. And you have to remember, Jamie and Robin, that even before the Ukraine crisis, Europe had a very tight market when it came to fuel. And Europe's much more vulnerable than a lot of the other global economies because of their dependency and their reliance on goods and services coming from Ukraine and Russia.
And Juliet, where are we with this selling off of companies linked to Russia?
Oh, it's been such a frenzy. In fact, the London Stock Exchange blocked trading of 27 Russia-linked firms because their prices had plummeted so much as investors were scrambling to get out and disentangle themselves from Russia and limit their exposure to those Western sanctions. The list includes Rosneft, Sberbank of Russia, Gazprom, EN Plus and Lukoil. They've all been suspended. And so in terms of the impact all of this and the Ukraine crisis is having on markets and individual sectors, really the airlines are really, really feeling it because there's a lot of pressure there on people feel that the travel sector is going to take another huge hit just at that time it was starting to gain ground again and recover after the pandemic. So BA owner, IAG, they lost about over 3%. Wizz Air, that's a big loser, down 8.2%. EasyJet down 5.5%. Now, there might not be any military no-fly zones, but analysts are saying, well, maybe consumers are going to create de facto no-fly zones because they're not going to be booking any flights. But I do want to talk to you about a couple of sectors which seem to be doing well right now. So defence companies. Now, results came out today. Melrose, that's a manufacturing group, and they are delaying payouts to shareholders because They say the Russian invasion is unquantifiable. Now, they own GKN, and I'll just remind you, they are the company that makes parts for Western plane makers, military plane makers, drones, missile, all those kind of manufacturers. Could they benefit, maybe, for an increase in Western defence spending like we've heard in Germany? And I'd say, that might be one to watch, because since Germany's announcement last week, European defence companies have been posting really strong gains. I'll just talk you through a few of them. Germany's Rheinmetall up 58% over the last week or so. Italy's Leonardo up 30%. France's Thales up 27%. And then also we've seen that growth in valuations for the US companies also get a boost as well. So Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, less spectacular, but still we're talking double-digit territory. BAE Systems, Chemring, they've jumped 23%. Avon Protection up 22%. And then other defence-related companies like Cohort, Kinetic and Babcock, they've all made double-digit gains too. And one last sector I think is really interesting is cybersecurity. Now, I'd like to talk to you a bit about Darktrace. I'm not sure if you remember them. This is the cyber group that was set up about 9 years ago by a whole bunch of former spies and mathematicians. And it launched on the London Stock Exchange, a huge fanfare last year. The valuation was about $9 billion. But then it lost a bit of momentum, had a disappointing 6 months, and actually got relegated from the FTSE 100 to the FTSE 250. Still not bad, but now they've increased their full-year outlook because suddenly they're getting a whole lot of renewed interest for cybersecurity. There are a lot of fears from companies all over the world that this threat of an escalation in cyber attacks and cyber threats is going to affect them. So it's all to do with these geopolitical tensions. Their shares have been recovering. They're way off their October highs, but they are recovering. So interesting sector to watch.
Juliet, thank you very much.
Well, these same European worries that Juliet was talking about have hit stock markets on Wall Street. Let's talk now to our correspondent, John Terrett in New York. John, what's the impact of this crisis on US markets and the economy as the conflict enters its second week?
Yeah, I know, amazing. Second week. The markets here are reacting to every single bit of news. Now, that's not really new because they've been doing that for the best part of the last 3 months or so because of all the inflation worries and things like that. But they're certainly doing it now. And an example would be yesterday, Wednesday, the markets absolutely soared away. And we finished in New York with the Dow up almost 600 points, 1.7%, almost 2%. NASDAQ up almost 2%, and the S&P 500 ahead by almost 2% as well, led by energy and financials. Now, they soared ahead in early trading today, Thursday, but they've now settled back, and the markets are down between about 0.4% and around 1%. And the reason for the boost yesterday and the early optimism this morning is because Jerome Powell, who is the chairman of the central bank, the Federal Reserve, has been giving testimony on Capitol Hill. Yesterday, Wednesday, he spoke to the House Financial Services Committee, and now today, Thursday, he's talking to the Senate Banking Committee. And the point is, what he said yesterday was he confirmed that there will be an interest rate hike coming up of 0.25%. That's 25 basis points. So not as much as the markets had feared to try to calm inflation, but there will be one, and it will come at 2 p.m. on the 16th of March, which is the second day of the next Federal Reserve meeting. Now, there's a couple of things to say about this. One is, none of us here can ever remember a time when the chairman of the central bank has signaled an interest rate hike in quite this way. It's unprecedented, but he's done it. So it's out there. And yesterday and early this morning, the markets really appreciated that because, as you know, everyone says markets hate uncertainty, and they surely do. So they got a bit of certainty. See, they could start boxing and coxing and wheeling and dealing and doing what they do best because they know that there will be an interest rate hike coming, and they know now the date and exactly how much it is going to be. And also, Chairman Powell said in the same testimony before the House yesterday, and he's saying the same thing now to the Senate, that the underlying U.S. economy is still strong. Now, it's bifurcated, which is a word that Americans love. It means twin speed. But it is bifurcated, no doubt about that. But generally speaking, the U.S. economy is very strong. Jobs are fine. Interest rates now going up to calm inflation that is way above the 2% target. That isn't quite so good, but it all seems a little bit manageable at the moment, and the effect on the economy here of the war has yet to be seen.
Let's just drill down a little bit on inflation, because it is going to be a major problem for President Biden in the run-up to this year's midterm elections.
Yeah.
I mean, how will inflation be affected by what's going on in Ukraine?
Well, here, I think it's fair to say that Chairman Powell yesterday and again today is sounding a little bit of a warning bell. I think that's fair to say. One of the things he said yesterday was that the sanctions being imposed on Russia appear to be very, very significant. But as for the effect on the U.S. economy of what's happening in Ukraine, it's kind of uncertain. That was his word. It's uncertain. So we're in treading water territory at the moment. But Chairman Powell did say that he thinks that inflation will begin easing by the end of the year, to which we say, really? Are you sure about that, Chairman Powell? This is a bit worrying. And an example of this would be that crude oil in the past 24 hours on global markets has gone up to as much as $115 a barrel. Well, we haven't seen that in well over 10 years, well over. Now, it came down this morning to 109. It's now at 111. And the reason for it coming down is because there's talk here that Iran may be about to open the taps on oil and also gas. I'm not sure how they would do that, given sanctions and things, but that's the talk, and that's why it came down. But Americans are looking at least at paying 5, 10, 15, 20 cents more per gallon quite soon. And that's fuel, and fuel is the main driver of inflation, particularly in this country, because so much of the commodities here have to be delivered by road. And so that is terribly worrying for President Biden. And inflation is his #1 priority, he said in the State of the Union on Tuesday. And his answer to it is buy American products and pass my spending bills in Congress. Now, others say, well, those spending bills are going to drive inflation even further. So we'll have to see. But the thing is, ordinary voters are hurting right now, and there are key elections coming up, which Mr. Biden wants to do well in November.
John, a very quick thought on the tech giant Apple that's just announced it's halting its sales in Russia.
Yes.
I mean, how much of a sacrifice is this for Apple?
Well, can I say, first of all, just quickly, that the cancelling of Russia that we're seeing by U.S. corporations and other corporations is breathtaking. I mean, it's absolutely staggering. As for Apple, Russia's a relatively small market for Apple. I don't think you have to remember Apple made $34 billion in profit in the last 3 months of the year, which, when you break it down, is not far short of $1 billion a day. Tim Cook, the boss, wants to be on the right side of history. And Warren Buffett recently called him a fantastic manager who cares about his company and his products and his customers. So I think Tim Cook probably knows what he's doing. But I mean, really, Apple, Alphabet, Boeing, Disney, Netflix, Dell, Ford, Exxon, and interestingly, Maersk, the big shipping company out of Denmark, refusing to take anything into Russian ports now. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. And the tiny Russian economy, $1.5 trillion, is now, and the Russian people, is going to be really hurting this year.
John, thanks for that. John Terres, our correspondent in New York.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. 1 million refugees fleeing the invasion of Ukraine. The United Nations warns of humanitarian crisis in Europe.
Hello, I'm Stephen Cole. What's on your agenda this week? I know when it comes to news, you're sport for choice. So many channels, so many opinions. But it's time to step off the news roundabout, time to cut out the noise, get to the heart of the real story with a talk show with a difference. I'll be finding out what the world is thinking by talking to the global decision makers and helping you set your own news agenda. Remember, we don't just report the news, we set the agenda.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Pence here. Bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Tear gas. So it's all begun now.
divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just gotta be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
Is the front line now after 9 days of fighting?
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Robin Dwyer. Our top stories. Face-to-face, Russian and Ukrainian delegations meet for a second round of talks on Belarusian territory.
Other headlines: Russia's attacks on Ukraine's cities have intensified as the invasion enters its second week with no pause in hostilities. Well, Russian troops have captured the southern Ukrainian city of Kherson, the first major city to fall into Russian hands. Yulia Vaslenko lives in Kherson. I asked her what was going on outside her home.
At this moment, seems like Russian troops, they occupied my city, definitely, and they are here just to have a rest, to steal and recover. At the same time, they shelled apartment blocks in different districts, and they shelled school, they shelled some civil buildings. During March 1st and 2nd, many civilian cars were shelled in different parts of the city.
Some Russians in the Russian government and Russian MPs will say that the Russian military is not targeting civilians in Ukraine. You're clearly contradicting that.
That's not true. They shell our civilians. They kill them. They ask us to stay home because they can kill us. And even only yesterday, they killed 46 people, 46 civilian people in my city. And they even shelled cars with children. They shelled ambulance car when it was in a ride to save people. So it's a lie.
When and how did you first learn that there were Russian troops on your streets where you are?
It was the day before yesterday. They shelled just houses, and we were hearing bombs. So we just hid in shelters, in underground, in our houses, and we were scared to leave our houses because it was really very dangerous. They were before on 24, 26 February. They were around the city, but they have not entered. And now they have entered in the city, and now they control all the situation. So we don't have Ukrainian army forces here. We don't have police. Police has left the city when the war has started. Just the first day of the war, our police in Kherson region, they left. So we are without any support here. We just have to defend ourselves as we can. We don't have anything. If someone enter my home, I don't know what to do. I just say, okay, come in, but don't kill me, because I don't have a gun. I'm not gonna fight with them. But we don't know what to expect from these people, because they already steal food from markets. They just keep us in scare.
Tell me about your supplies of food and access to clean water and money even.
It's also a very difficult situation, because not all districts and not all neighborhoods in Kherson have food, have water, have gas. People sit in cold houses. For example, in Antonivka, where a strategical bridge is close to Antonivka, it's a small neighborhood just in front of the city. People have been in quandary for 6 days, and now they sit without electricity, without gas. Shops are closed. There is no humanitarian aid. There is nothing. All were closed. And now, only today, we have supplies of bread, and some supermarkets have opened their doors so people can get something that left. So new supplies we don't have. The same with water. Some districts from city have drinking water and clean water, but some districts don't have. gas the same, food the same. We just have some essentials we bought previously, so we just use it. When it will finish, we don't know what to do.
100,000 Ukrainian refugees have arrived in Hungary alone since the invasion began.
Aid centres are providing food, fresh water and clothing for the new arrivals. Our correspondent Lucy Huff now reports from Budapest.
For these arrivals, the long and difficult journey across Ukraine's western border with Hungary is over. From the border, they are transported by minivan to this aid centre in a former primary school and given food, water and fresh clothes. The local mayor says his town needed to welcome those fleeing the conflict with open arms.
As we have a big border crossing station in Bereg-Shurani, it was obvious that we had to set up a refuge here. In the beginning, we didn't think that many people would come to the village, but we're seeing masses of refugees now.
But Hungary's border crossings are for most people just a temporary stop. From the border town of Zahany is a direct train to Budapest, from where hundreds plan to continue their journeys. Angela is a school teacher from the eastern Ukrainian city of Dnipro.
Fortunately, I came from a city which is not undergoing huge bombing attacks or shooting, but sirens go on and off every day, several times. People are sitting in the basements and cellars. I'm a very lucky person because my trip is with my granddaughter, and we're traveling to my relatives in Luxembourg, who were absolutely kind and generous to invite us for this period of time. And I hope I will return soon.
Those here are exhausted and shell-shocked after the journey. There are volunteers on the ground to help, including Andrei, who is himself Ukrainian.
I've been helping my parents who are here, and now for this one day I'm helping here to the people who are arriving from Ukraine. It's pretty chaotic, I must say. Chaotic because it's not much centralized, but there are so many volunteers that we kind of can hold it.
The municipality of Budapest is also helping people so they don't have to spend the night in the train station. The youngest arrival here is a 2-week-old baby. Local and international donations have also been pouring in to help the hundreds of thousands who've been displaced. Businesses and enterprises are also doing their bit to help.
A number of rail services like SMBC and Deutsche Bahn are offering free railway services to anyone who has left Ukraine to help them with their onward journey from hubs like this one in Budapest to elsewhere in Europe.
It's been just over a week since Russia's military action started in Ukraine, uprooting the lives of its citizens. The journey to get here to Budapest has been long and the future still uncertain. Lucy Hoff, CGTN, Budapest.
More than 1 million people have fled Ukraine since the invasion began, according to the United Nations. Many are heading towards Ukraine's western neighbours, Poland, Hungary and Moldova. Lars-Johan Lundbach is Chief of Mission for the International Organization for Migration in Moldova.
The situation down south in the border is one of very high pressure on that border post, and the border authorities are working round the clock to be able to process the thousands and thousands, actually tens of thousands of migrants that are coming from principally big metropolitan areas like Odessa, that is only 50 kilometers away. We see also people coming up from the north of Moldova, a little bit less, but still tens of thousands also crossing there. The latest we hear is that there are people that are coming there from as far off as the capital, Kiev. So up until now, we've had around 146,000 entries to Moldova. That is one of the poorest countries in Europe. And this is a very heavy burden for the country.
And what kind of support are you able to give them?
Well, up until now, the government of Moldova has been able to respond quite a lot by itself. It's opened up bus services from the far-off border sites, but also creating shelters in the capital. And I was speaking with the mayor of Chisinau this morning and seeing how the centers there for reception are there but overflowing, and we will need for the international help to come in and create better shelter conditions and much more volumes of shelter. And that is going to happen very soon, we think, because as you have seen the development of the situation in Ukraine, it's very likely that Odessa will also be under pressure, and therefore will have even higher degrees of people coming in.
So what do you think will happen to these people next? Do you get the sense that they will stay in Moldova or move on elsewhere, perhaps to relatives in different countries?
Yes, we have around 38% of those who come in, of these 146,000 that leave. So that leaves a significant amount of people that are staying in Moldova. I think that we'll even see a lower percentage of those that can leave, because the ones who have come up until now have been relatively well prepared. They have been coming in cars, but now I think that we will see people in much worse situation, because they will be leaving under very dire situation in their countries of their towns of origin.
And you said there was a lot of pressure on Moldova in dealing with these new arrivals, but how are ordinary citizens, ordinary people from Moldova reacting to them?
Well, I must say that the people of Moldova have been very generous. For instance, at the reception center, which I saw, we have seen there is a special place for donations, where people donate clothes or things that can be of use for the refugees, but also people coming and spontaneously offering a place to stay for Ukrainian refugees.
The United States has accused Moscow of waging a war on truth over the Kremlin's decision to block independent media outlets operating in Russia. This all comes as the EU approved a ban on the Russian state broadcasters RT and Sputnik. CGTN's Duncan Hooper has been watching the battle for the media. Well, obviously the battle to establish the truth is being fought over as fiercely as the military battle.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a war in which both sides are claiming that they are the victims and the other side is the aggressor. So we had the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs today coming out and saying it was the victim of information terrorism. And their parliament in Russia has said that they need to impose jail sentences for people who give out misinformation. Remember, for them, that's anything which conflicts with the official government line about what's happening in Ukraine. They've closed down media, as you've said, and they even did a lesson for schools today to try and explain to children how they can follow the official news on what's happening. But for Russia, that's really business as usual. That's been happening for a while. The real change is that we've seen the EU and the West being much more willing to block channels, to clamp down on channels.
Social media channels, of course, have huge power. How have they responded to the challenges? Yeah,
that's the truth. The government's there's a certain amount they can do, but really the control there is in the hands of companies. And we've seen Twitter and Facebook, who've come in for a lot of flack during COVID, invest quite heavily in this area. But some of the other social media are lagging a bit behind. So TikTok, Instagram, traditionally saw themselves as lifestyle channels that didn't need to invest in this, and now they're struggling to catch up and saying, yes, we're going to clamp down on this misinformation. What's been very interesting is to see Telegram. Telegram is very big in the region, and the founder of that, Pavel Durov, he came out a couple of days ago and he said, yes, there is a problem with misinformation, and he was honest. He said, we don't have the resources to address that. All we can do is restrict the platform. And people responded to that and said, please don't. We need this. For us civilians, this is a shield. This is the only weapon that we have to show what's going on around us and perhaps to keep us safe.
All of us broadcasters are packing our programmes with first-person narrative, people shooting their own material in Ukraine, people posting stuff on Twitter. Just a final thought about how seriously the social media channels are about protecting those users. People could be putting themselves in danger and giving up their locations, couldn't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the social media channels have come to an awareness that the information that they have can be very valuable to hostile actors looking to seek out opponents and critics. And so, yes, they've put out advice to people. They've said, Maybe if you're in a danger zone, turn off your location information so people can't track you. Don't show friends, don't tag people. Only send messages by encrypted means. And also they've been rolling out new functionality to lock those accounts so people can't see what you've posted in the past. Instagram's giving more ability to encrypt things. Google has turned off traffic monitoring so people can't see where civilians might be gathering in case they wanted to attack them, for instance.
Can I just ask you a last question on how difficult it is to police your network? If you run Facebook, if you run Twitter, if you run Instagram or any of these other channels, how big is your army? How many police are working for you, checking the stuff out?
Yeah, and that, I mentioned earlier that Twitter and Facebook are ahead of the game on this, but their critics would still say they're still so far behind. A lot of the people that they're using to moderate this content are volunteers. And there are millions and millions of posts coming out. Video and photos we've seen in this conflict are so powerful. They're much harder to moderate than text because you can't do that automatically. You need a human being to watch them. They don't disclose how many people that they've got, but clearly it isn't enough. And if Facebook and Twitter aren't putting enough into it, then the other networks, which I said are behind the game on this, they're so much further behind.
OK, great. Duncan, thank you very much indeed. We'll no doubt return to the subject in the coming days, but thank you.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. After St. Petersburg lost the rights to host football's European Cup, more bad news for Russian sport.
So this is it. I'm just about to be shot.
Tense here. Bottles are being thrown as they do so.
There are about 3 critical bridges here in Malawi. That's one of them. We're going to cross that bridge.
As you can see behind me, police forces
who are replying with gas. Gas just came in.
Gas. So it's all begun now.
Divisions leading the charge into West Mosul have brought us here.
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots.
This is where most of the fighting has been concentrated.
It's the front line now after 9 days of fighting.
We're about 2 to 3 kilometers from
within
the front
clear
line.
view of this front line position.
Murray, what would you say is a good question?
Stephen, I'd say it's one where there's always more than one answer.
The Answers Project is a new podcast series from CGTN Europe. With me, Stephen Cole.
And me, Mari Beveridge. In each episode, we'll take a complex question.
And with the help of some of the world's foremost experts, shine light on some of the answers. So join us for The Answers Project.
Available wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, welcome back to Global Business Europe. The EU has said the Russia-Ukraine conflict could result in the worst refugee crisis Europe has seen for 30 years.
Charities say donations of food and medicines are desperately needed. People in Spain have answered the call for help. Our correspondent Rahul Pathak reports from Madrid.
Ukrainians in Spain helping friends and family back home. Just over 112,000 Ukrainians are living in this country, and over 20,000 are in Madrid. Many have come together with Spaniards to donate what they can to help the millions affected by the conflict.
I would have never expected this many people to donate. People are coming from all over Madrid. There are other collection points around the city, but most people are now coming here.
I feel I have to help others. It's who we are. We have to help them with everything they need. We must send food, send medicine, and help in any way we can.
So here we are at one of the main Ukrainian supermarkets here in Madrid, where they're collecting donations of food, medicines, clothes and blankets. And these are primarily going to go to refugees in Romania and Poland. Those two countries have taken the majority of the estimated 1 million people to have fled Ukraine. And collections like these are taking place in towns and cities right across Spain, including Barcelona, Valencia and Malaga. Priority has now shifted away from clothes and blankets to medical supplies and food. The volunteers here say the collections will continue for as long as is necessary.
We feel really sad. We feel distraught, desperate. We feel like we can't do enough to help them. It's for our families and relatives. We're trying our best here, with everyone volunteering. It's a situation that makes you want to cry.
The European Union estimates the total number of Ukrainian refugees could eventually rise to 4 million, causing the continent's greatest humanitarian crisis since the Balkans conflict in the 1990s. The need for essential donations like these could not be greater. Rahul Pathak, CGTN, Madrid.
The International Paralympic Committee has banned athletes from Russia and Belarus taking part in the Beijing Winter Games. It's a U-turn on Wednesday's decision to let them compete.
Our correspondent Andrew Wilson looks at how events in Ukraine have challenged sporting bodies' neutrality.
It started with UEFA's Champions League final, and St. Petersburg Stadium struck off as host for Europe's most significant club football tournament. Less than a week later, the Russian national side and all the national clubs were suspended by the global governing body FIFA in coordination with Europe's UEFA. Russian football no longer has any international profile.
Our country has always adhered to the principle that sport is beyond politics. But we are constantly drawn into the politics because they understand the importance of sport in the lives of our Russian people.
And in terms of global gestures, few can ignore the sudden decision by Russian billionaire Roman Abramovich to sell his beloved Chelsea football club. Pressure on Abramovich in particular and other wealthy Russians is building in British politics.
Last week, the Prime Minister said that Abramovich is facing sanctions. He later corrected the record to say that he isn't. Well, why on earth isn't he?
Across the world of sport, the ties are being severed. After cancelling this year's Grand Prix race in Sochi, Formula One has gone further by cancelling its contract completely with Russian Grand Prix organisers. Large sporting organisations are looking ahead.
I can just inform you that right now our tender for the European broadcasting rights is underway. It was issued last week, and we have now taken the territories of Belarus and the Russian Federation off this tender.
Sport has been a crucial platform for the Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now both the international and European judo federations have removed his titles as honorary president and ambassador, and World Taekwondo has gone further and removed his honorary black belt in that sport. The world of sport has long been proud of its political neutrality, but this time it's moved with uncharacteristic speed on both a national and personal level. Andrew Wilson, CGTN.
The Olympic flame for the 2022 Winter Paralympics has reached the Olympic Green Park in Beijing.
21 torchbearers took part in the relay. 5 of them are people with disabilities. The torch travelled the same 3-kilometre route as for the Winter Olympics. On Friday, it will make its way to the Bird's Nest Stadium for the opening ceremony.
The headlines again. Face-to-face, Russian and Ukrainian delegations meet for a second round of talks on Belarusian territory. It comes as Ukraine's President Zelensky calls for direct talks with Russia's Vladimir Putin and says his country's defence is holding. Meanwhile, the Russian president is speaking now and has been praising Russian forces. These are the latest live pictures from his press briefing.
Meanwhile, Russia's attacks on Ukraine's cities have intensified as the invasion enters its second week with no pause in hostilities.
And Ukraine's western neighbours extend a warm welcome at the end of a harrowing journey. The United Nations says over 1 million people have fled the country as the refugee exodus continues.
That's it for Global Business Europe. Thanks for watching.
More on all of our stories at europe.cgtn.com, and do follow CGTN Europe on Twitter, Facebook and Instagram.
We're on smart TV apps, Roku, Apple TV, Amazon Fire and Android TV, YouTube and Dailymotion, CGTN.com and the CGTN app, and in the UK on Freeview.
Coming up next on CGTN, it's Africa Live. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. From all of the team in London, it's goodbye.
Goodbye.